Hello, and thanks for joining me on another episode. This week I'm back in the worm area for another worm update of the 5 bins. And this is a pretty short video as all the bins are doing pretty well. The major difference between this week and last week is that I have a fan on the floor directed towards the bins. It was suggested to me that I try a fan to see if I could circulate a little bit more air around the bins. And I have to say that it did help out. This bin isn't as damp and holding as much moisture as it did before. So to continue the process and moving it more to be drier, not a dry bin, just not as wet, I'm going to give it a slightly smaller than normal feeding. I can't help that the feeding is a little bit wet, but I'm just going to give it a slightly smaller feeding and then set this bin up for the next week. Not much to see here as the worms are pretty spread out, so no worm balls this week. Moving over to my second Vermi bag tote. This one was harvested about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and with this one as well, I have been battling moisture issues within the bag itself, just with the humidity and the hot weather. And so I believe this too benefited from the fan. The castings still are holding a good quantity of water, but it doesn't seem like the bin is suffering from the humidity issues I have in my house. I think adding the cardboard helped some as well. Now in this bin, the worms were more clumped together in one area, but again, no real large worm balls of notice to really mention, but the worms seem to be happy and doing well in here. So with this bin as well, when it comes to a feeding, I am going to do a slightly smaller feeding than usual. But all I have are things that really do hold on to water since I'm giving it things right out of the garden. So I'm just lowering the quantity of food that I put in hopes that these bins dry out a little bit more, and always being careful of how dry the bins get. But this one is set up for the next week. And the first of the regular totes. Now with the totes, I don't even put a regular lid on these totes anymore because the lids seem to make it hold a lot more moisture. So moving forward, these bins are going to just keep the mosquito mesh on top of it unless I find out that it is drying out, where I'll put the lids back on. Now with this regular tote, the worms were in the area that was fed, and that could be because the bubble wrap, it was not completely over the one side. So with this one, the totes still have a little bit more water. I am going to give it a little bit larger feeding because the worms went through everything, and it seems like I have a lot of worms in this bin, and I don't want them to start searching for the exit. So once this is fed up and covered back, it's set up for its next week. And in the other regular tote that I have, this bin as well is very dry on the side where there weren't any worms, and it is also getting a fan. So all 4 of these bins that had the fan directed towards it did not have the same moisture issue. So I'm going to keep the fan on and see if it does dry it out enough to my liking or starts to over dry them. It is always a dance with the moisture. I don't think I'm ever going to find that perfect sweet spot. It's always going to be, what do I do this week versus what do I do next week with the worms. But I do like the impact that having the fan had on them. So thank you for that suggestion. And with this bin, as far as the food goes, I'm going to give it a regular sized feeding as well. Again, being conscious of how much moisture I'm putting in. I'm aware that these bins hold it, so giving it a normal size feeding, I'm a little hesitant, but I'm also concerned that the fan is drying this out more, so I don't want to over dry this. So I'm giving it a larger feeding and then putting the bubble wrap over the whole thing rather than just half. And lastly, for the Vermi Bag Mini, I did give it a larger feeding last week with the knowledge that I could be making the casting super wet. And in the center of it, it is pretty moist, but on the sides, it is crispy. So another suggestion I had was to put the bubble wrap around the sides. So I'm going to attempt to do that this week and see how putting the bubble wrap does. This was also under the fan or in the flow of the fan, so I don't know if the fan helped dry that out more. So again, I'm going to give this quite a bit of food. I am really trying to test the boundaries of the moisture retention in this bin. So with the fan and the bubble wrap, and this is like a big ice block of food, I want to see what happens. There is a bin, like I said, at the bottom. So if it does leak out to the bottom, I will be able to catch any leachate there. But I want to give this the best opportunity to stay moist around the edges as I can. And also get the worms to come and stay at the top, because this is harvested from the bottom. If you're unfamiliar with the flow through system, it has a zipper at the bottom. So I really don't want the worms to be hanging out where it's going to be harvested. And I'm going to hold off on harvesting this until one of my other bins needs it. But that finishes the update for this week. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.